You are listening to the Freitae Effect podcast with your current co-host, Simon Freitae.
And Azeb Freitae.
It is currently 56 degrees in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Clear skies, no chance of rain, probably. I don't know. I'm not a meteorologist. Back to you, Azeb.
Thank you, Simon. Well, this week, we are talking about the role of the news and where we get our information. Since election season is upon us, and it is about to get real annoying for the next year-ish, we thought it would be a good time to really think about the sources and outlets that we receive knowledge about candidates and things happening around the world. We also want to explore the idea of the First Amendment, aka freedom of speech. This episode features an interview with a real-life journalist and our dear friend, Faith Pinho, who is a reporter for the Daily Pilot in Long Beach, California. Back to you, Simon.
This next segment is brought to you by How the Turns Have Tabled. So, we're going to slow things down a little bit.
Dun, 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 dun.
Dun, dun, dun. Basically, on this week's episode of How the Turns Have Tabled, I will be talking about my first time voting. And even though this episode is not really about voting, just another little shameless plug to go frickin' vote, guys. I love the Wii music. Yes. So, when it was my first time to go voting, then Bernie Sanders was the person I was going to put my ballot in for. And, okay, now it's a little, yeah, it's just distracting. I love it though. But I was going to go vote for Bernie Sanders, so I go to the Memorial Union building of the University of New Hampshire, otherwise known as the MUB. And there's puppy boots, there's bees freaking everywhere, and then I'm just hanging out, and I see this van pull up, and I'm like, sure, white van, I'll get in that with a bunch of strangers. So then...
Pause. Let's just literally pause. Hi, guys. We haven't even said hi to you. Hello.
Hey.
Sorry that we are insanely ridiculous. We're good. We know that you're good. We just wanted to really get into it because we're just really excited to talk about this episode.
Yes.
So let's just speak English for 2 seconds. We know that we skipped the intro. We know that we went right into How the Turns Have Tabled. And we know that you're aware of that.
Oh, yeah.
But we just wanted to make sure that we know that you know that you know that everything is good. Okay, so we good.
Yeah.
Just wanted to rewind for 2 seconds. But we out here.
How the cookie crumbles.
Okay, Bruce Almighty references. Heard you.
No, it's the news episode, baby.
It's a beautiful day.
Oh!
So this is our new news.
Mm-hmm.
We talking about that new. We talking about how the news be new.
Oh.
We talking about how you don't even know that there is new news. But there is.
Because it's so new.
Because it's happening right now in this moment. Because present, baby. Anyways.
So I get in this white van with a bunch of strangers. And who is in the freaking passenger seat? Isra gosh darn Fitz. If you are not a Pretty Little Liars fan, his name is Ian Harding, and he had a dog. And obviously I was attracted to the dog immediately, and then I noticed the man sitting there, which I had watched many seasons of him acting, and it was wild. But I did not fangirl as much as every other person in the car who literally was just sucking on his ego the whole time.
So wait, you were in a whole car with Ian Fitz?
Ian Harding.
Oh.
Yeah,
Ezra Fitz,
yeah.
Ian Harding.
Yeah, so the reason why is that his partner at the time was, I don't know if it was his girlfriend or his wife, but involved in, basically her family was involved in politics in New Hampshire. Okay. And so he was part of like a crew making sure that college students go vote. Because, yeah, usually, like, college students, especially if you're from out of state, which I was, it's harder for you to get access, to know where to go to the polls, where, like, a high school might be, or the actual facility that is, you know, hosting whatever voting sites. But they made it really easy for students to get to there from campus really quickly. And I went at a great time of day. And I chilled with him. He said I was going to be an awesome social worker and how he
fucking affirmed you.
Because he said he has like friends that are social workers that are like doing crazy stuff around the world.
Yes.
And he's like taking photo shoots with supermodels and who's really living a good life. But whatever. So, anyways.
Well, hold up. So Ezra Fitz a.k.a. Ian Harding, was like, Simon, you have my blessing. You are going to be an amazing social worker because you are on your way to go vote in this van with me right now.
Basically verbatim.
But also, let's talk about how, like, New Hampshire is a swing state and how important it is that everybody in that state votes. Because those votes matter, especially in the electoral system, which, honestly, I'm just saying words and I don't really know what any of that shit means. But I know that that carries more weight than anything. So anybody who lives in those states where you are a swing state, even if you're not a swing state, like Massachusetts is known to be mostly Democratic, even though it feels really Republican sometimes when you're a person of color. Sorry, just saying the truth. But also just saying that your vote always counts, and we know we say this in every episode, but we're just driving the force home because obviously the 2016 election was really important. So at this time, this was the 2016 election, correct?
Yeah, it was.
So Ezra Fitz, aka Ian Harding, was like, I'm gonna go spend my celebrity time in New Hampshire because I believe that millennials need to get to the polls and really make sure that their voices are heard in this 2016 election. Now you may continue your story. I'm just driving the point home. You feel me? Bye.
Yee. So basically, getting off the voting part and back into the news, I voted for Bernie Sanders, and then I get outside, and there are journalists, and I love journalists. So, sorry, I'm making as a joke.
He said, and I love journalists.
Well, I love the attention. So,
because I am an actor, obviously. And I am a Leo.
Yes.
Oh,
shine in the bright light.
Breaking news: Simon is an attention whore.
Whoa.
Okay.
Facts. So this guy comes up to me with his little notepad, and I was like, "It's time to be famous." And then he was like, "Who you voting for?" And you
he
can...
said that like a journalist from the 1950s. Who you voting for, guys?
What is the political views of yourself?
Get your
You mind if I ask you a few questions? See here. So, I answered his questions. I ended up in a little NHPR, New Hampshire Public Radio, I think.
When are you not in the media, though, when you're in New Hampshire?
Always.
Like, there's the, the Wildcat thing.
Oh, yeah, it's a great day to be a Wildcat.
Every day's a great day to be a Wildcat. Woo!
Because the Say Something Nice UNH video.
Yes, we need to find that.
Okay, so we'll include that in this. I was going to also include the link to the article that the guy ended up writing so that I ended up being in the news the first time I voted.
Wink.
Yee. But yeah, just whenever you see people with cameras or notepads, talk to them sometimes because maybe you'll end up in videos or the news. It's cool. So the turntable many a which way when I went to go vote, and I got to play with puppies.
And you were in the news.
Yeah.
So many turning tables.
The puppies were the important part to me, but I guess the news.
Well, I mean,
yes.
Yeah. You're one of those, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know what? Puppies are cute, so
Puppies,
I guess we're going there. Anyherm, let's slide right into the next segment. So as we mentioned in the introduction, even though it was super fast and we know that we talk at 100 miles per hour, just wanted to reiterate that we are featuring an interview from one of our homegirls, Faith Elizabeth Pinho, a.k.a. Faitherlin, a.k.a. Faith Kebab, a.k.a. saxophonist by day, a.k.a. journalist by day and night, a.k.a. Scorpio sister.
Scorp.
So many a.k.a.s.
Aka.
But this is our girl. So you better know, you better recognize, Dirty E represent. We out here. We climbing the socioeconomic ladder. We living in other states. We travel in the world. We are reporting the news.
Yeah.
We represent a multitude of people. So I just needed to give that grand biographical introduction. Simon, will you bring us into the next segment?
So, we are now going to jump into the Rip-Hits with Faith.
We back with Rip-Its, and if you haven't listened for the first time, or if this is your first time listening, sorry, excuse me, I've been drinking champagne because I got a raise. Hello! I ain't got money though because I'm poor! But, we excited. So anyways, I've been very excited because I deserve this shit. So hello, know your worth. Yes. Bam, bam. Anyways, we back with real people in the system. Rip-Its. And our Rip-It person this week is Faith. That's why we gave her the greatest introduction of all time. Bum, 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 bum. Anyways, we are about to share this interview with you right now. Hello! We are here with Faith Elizabeth Pinho.
What up, what up?
I've been waiting so long to have her on the show. I'm so excited. So hey girl, welcome to the Freitae Effect as our interviewed guest. Would you like to introduce yourself, my friend?
Absolutely. You already did a fantastic job. My name is Faith Pinho. That's it. I'm a journalist out in the Los Angeles area. I work technically in Orange County with the Daily Pilot newspaper, which is a community newspaper of the Los Angeles Times, and I covered the city of Costa Mesa.
Amazing. Amazing. How do you identify so people have an idea of like where you're coming from and whatnot?
I identify as a woman, Portuguese, Jewish, American female from Everett, Massachusetts. 22 years old.
Amazing. Cool. So, Faith Kebab, this episode obviously is about kind of how we get our information and news and reporting and whatnot. And since you are a certified journalist, would you like to share with us like what inspired you to become a journalist?
Sure. So I've known that I wanted to be a journalist since I was a really, really little kid. I think some of the earliest inspiration was this movie that I watched called All the President's Men. It's a movie about the book of the same name by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward, who are the two journalists who basically uncovered the fact that President Richard Nixon was trying to steal information about his opposing party in the 1972 election. And these two reporters broke open that story. And as a result, Nixon resigned from his presidency. So because of these two like junior reporters' work, the president basically got taken down. And I remember watching that as a little kid and just being like, whoa, that's so cool. And also like the scenes of newsrooms back then were like so high adrenaline and just like typewriters clacking away and like the phone constantly ringing. And it's funny because now everyone's on their computers, but those were some early inspirations. I also like knew that I wanted to be a writer forever, and I thought at a certain point like, oh, I'm not gonna make any money as a novelist, let me jokes on me, let me go be a journalist. Well, that worked out pretty well.
So then as a reporter, how do you get your news?
From a variety of sources. So usually first thing in the morning, I kind of take in some headlines from notifications that I get on my phone, and then I also get like 4, I think, different newsletters in my inbox. So I'll peep those, and then I will listen to the New York Times podcast, The Daily, on my way into work, and also NPR, the newscast. I'll usually listen to that on my way into work. And if I have time, I'll listen to a couple other mini podcasts that are basically just headlines. There's this French one called Géopolitique that I listen to once in a big while if I'm feeling a little fancy. And then I listen to the Orange County Register podcast, which is basically just county headlines. And then when I get into work, I'll like read some more of the Daily Pilot, which is my stuff, just to make sure I know what my colleagues are doing, the LA Times. And then throughout the day, I'm like constantly like checking Twitter, looking on the New York Times, the LA Times, Boston Globe. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. So like for your own intel and for your day job, is that how you source, is like that's how you source news, essentially?
Pretty much. I mean, that's how I like intake other people's news. That's
Okay,
what I mean.
cool.
Yeah.
And then so like why, like if when you're doing your job, your actual job, how do you guys actually like find things to report on?
It's a great question. From all like avenues, all sources, it's kind of random. So, okay, a lot of the times it's just talking to people. Like, for instance, I cover a city right now, so it's kind of my responsibility to know who the key players are in the city, who the community leaders are, to get to know them, and then just kind of like check in with them pretty regularly and to be like, hey, what's going on? Is there something I should know about? Blah, blah, blah. Our responsibility is to report on the government, to hold the government accountable. So anything that the government puts out, we pay attention to. So like there are regular council meetings or planning commission meetings, things like that. So we check it. We go to those meetings, first of all. We check in on like the agendas for those meetings, talk to people who are involved with that. sometimes people will write in or call in with some tips about story ideas, and I highly encourage any listener who thinks that they have a story that could be interesting to the news media to find their local reporters and call them up and be like, hey, I have this story. Like, that's where a lot of the good stories come from. Also, just like, yeah, a lot of word on the street stuff. Like, I think if I'm talking to people enough, which I should be as a reporter, then I'll hear stuff that will strike my interest, or going around town and just driving around, walking around, I'll see stuff. Like a couple weeks ago, I saw a banner for an event that I hadn't heard about from anything, but I ended up finding out what that banner was for and then doing a big story on the event. And so it's kind of using all senses and all sources.
Mm-hmm. And then how do you decide, like, how, like, do you guys, like, have a meeting or, like, come up in a room and you're like, these are the hot topics for the day or for the week? Especially because news nowadays is, like, so urgent and streaming and, like, immediate. It's like, how do you make those decisions of what gets, like, sent out? And, like, what is postponed for later, or what's, like, published in print versus what's published, like, online, you know?
Lots of good questions in there, too. So we do have a news meeting at the beginning of every week on Mondays, and that's where our community reporters will gather and be like, hey, here's what we know is on deck for this week that's going on in town. So there may be this city council meeting on Tuesday, and they're talking about this hot button issue, and so we have to cover that. Or it might be, there's this event this weekend, we'll want to do a preview ahead of time so that people know to go to this event or why it's an important event in the community or something like that. But as you said, news is really urgent these days, and there is breaking news occasionally. So, I mean, because we're a community newspaper, the nature of the news is typically less breaking. So there may be, like, one thing that was sort of breaking news that actually happened over the weekend was in the last city that I covered Laguna Beach, just like from the reality shows. And one weekend it broke on like a Sunday afternoon, a Sunday night, that there was a murder in town. And so that was like breaking news. So like first thing Monday morning, I went out to talk to all the neighbors and find out as much as I could what happened. And my colleague back in the newsroom was calling all the police departments and all the local law enforcement agencies and trying to get as much information as possible. So that's an example of breaking news. But like I said, if as a good reporter, you know what's going on in town, you'll kind of have an idea or a sense of what's going to happen in the week. And then you always have to be ready for something to break. But for the most part, you have a pretty good gist. And the stories do flux based on what breaks or if something breaks or doesn't. So for instance, if I'm working on a story for an event that's going on that weekend that I'm previewing, but then we find out that, there was a murder last night, like, of course we have to go cover the murder. That's going to be old news if we wait a few days to cover it.
Cool. So how did you get your news before you became the news?
I love it. A lot of the same avenues, I would say. Like, I'm pretty traditional when it comes to my news intake, which probably is unusual for someone of my generation, but I had a subscription to the New York Times for a long time, and I sort of semi-recently got a subscription to the Boston Globe, but I would check those pretty regularly, NPR a lot, the New York Times, the Daily a lot. And I also like to keep up with whatever my local newspapers are. So although I don't actually live in Everett anymore, where we're from, I still will pretty regularly check in on the Everett Independent and the Everett Advocate to see what's going on, which will come as no surprise to some of your listeners. But yeah, and then I live in Long Beach, California, so there are a couple of local papers that I read, the Long Beach Post and the Grunion Gazette, pretty much every week too.
So how do you think most people get their news?
Girl, if I had the answer to that, I would be a millionaire in the journalism industry. No, I don't know. And most people is like an extremely varied group, right? Because there are older people who still prefer to get their news through traditional avenues, like a print newspaper literally thrown onto their lawn. But then people like you and me, except I'm kind of an anomaly because I'm a journalist, but like people in our generation, right, young millennials, top of Gen Z, like most people, I think, and those demographics are getting their news through social media. Like they'll see friends post articles on Facebook, or they'll hear about people talking about something on Instagram, and then they'll search on Google, like what is Colin Kaepernick kneeling for instance, because they see their friends posting about it. So I think those are very different ways from getting about, sorry, let me rephrase that. Those are very different ways to consume news, and I think everybody is taking in news just in different ways. So it's honestly something that's really challenging the journalism industry right now, because it's a very clunky business model and it's still relying heavily on old sources of income, such as like advertising and print papers. And I can tell you, like, everybody I've worked with has been trying to crack the code for how to make money in this new business model. Do you hear this car honking behind me? I'm like, shit. Should I say that again so we don't have that in the recording?
No, it's okay. It's fine. It's funny.
Okay. Literally out here in my car in a garage in the middle of Los Angeles, so it's my recording studio for the day.
Cool. Okay. Thank you for answering that question. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit, because I feel like these two things are correlated, especially, being a journalist and the news and freedom of speech. How do you feel about the First Amendment?
I love that shit. It's the best amendment in the whole Constitution. Yes. No, honestly, the First Amendment, it's funny because if you go into pretty much any journalist institution, like the school that I attended or any school that I looked at when I was looking at colleges, and a lot of news outlets and the museum, like all of these places somewhere prominently have the First Amendment displayed, because it's so central to our role in society and our job, and it is increasingly coming under attack by people in authority. So I love this question because it means that people who are not journalists are thinking about it. And sometimes I'm like, are we the only people around here talking about the First Amendment? Because we talk about it a lot, and how, how to uphold free speech and freedom of press and freedom of assembly, all of these things. So I love this question. Thank you for asking. Love that shit.
Yeah. I was going to say, how do you feel like, if your thoughts have changed or evolved around the First Amendment since you became a reporter, or like, how did you think about it before that? Or did you think about it at all?
Good question. I mean, I guess before I went to college, I probably wasn't super aware of it, but in college, at least in my journalism school at Washington and Lee University, they made a pretty big emphasis about the importance of the First Amendment, and you're required to take some journalism classes, including one that's like a law and journalism class, in which the First Amendment is a huge subject, and just about how it applies to your day-to-day job. So I think because of the classes probably that I took in college, I'm more aware of the First Amendment kind of in day-to-day life. But I will say, like, I think in general, I've become more aware of it in the last couple of years because of the nature of our country and how things are so divided and there's so much conflict, that the First Amendment comes up not only for freedom of press, but I'll be covering people who are fighting about the First Amendment. Because, like, for instance, good example, I was covering the city of Laguna Beach up until recently, and there's the Laguna Beach City Council, and there are 5 people on this council. So they recently elected a new member. His name is Peter Blake, and he is a person who speaks his mind no matter what is on his mind. And a lot of people in town who come to these council meetings, or who in general interact with Peter Blake or the council in town, get really upset at how vocal he is. And so I was actually covering a battle over the First Amendment. So it was kind of this interesting thing where, like, the subject of what I was reporting on was really a conflict about the First Amendment, of Peter Blake saying, hey, I can exercise my freedom of speech by saying whatever I want, and other people saying, well, the stuff that you're talking about is hate speech, or you're making people feel that they cannot come up before council because they feel bullied by you, so that's impinging my own freedom of speech. And then I, as a reporter, was exercising my First Amendment rights by reporting on this. So yeah, it's kind of a big mess of First Amendment rights.
That's cool. So that actually segues right into my next question of, how do you feel about people that you kind of, if this is like properly phrased, I guess, people who abuse the First Amendment. And I say abuse because if they're saying it like they're saying hate speech, or they're provoking or instigating danger to certain communities, or like just like things that are obviously, start like a riot or something. You know what I mean?
Insightful speech.
Yeah. How do you feel about how the First Amendment applies in those circumstances?
I mean, I don't even know if it matters how I feel, because like the courts have made so many decisions on this stuff, and although I have studied it in the past, I couldn't like tell you what the courts have decided about hate speech or insightful speech and things like that. I guess I would say like I'm kind of in awe at how much is allowed, because some of it is shocking. Like some speech seems so insightful, and yet the First Amendment allows that. And the courts have allowed it historically, so I don't know if it matters how I feel about that in that sense. However, I will say that, like, as a journalist, it's really interesting to me to see how the news media treats that kind of speech sometimes. Like, for example, there was a local TV station that had one of those banners across the screen that had some kind of phrase in it that was later determined to be really insensitive. And the television station took down whatever the phrase was and apologized for it. And that instance made the news at other news outlets. So like, for instance, the LA Times reported, oh, this TV station posted something that was insensitive, and then they took it down. That was an article that we had. And there was a behind the scenes discussion about, should we post a picture of what that television screen looked like when it had the insensitive words on it. And so I will say, like, there is a lot of ethical balancing that goes on behind the scenes that I think a lot of people don't take into account when they read or see or listen to the news media discussing instances of maybe not hate speech, but even just instances of insensitive speech. There's actually a lot of back and forth typically that goes on at a news organization about what to put out, and are we like helping the process by reporting on what they said, or how do we word this?
Okay, cool. So pretty much, I guess, like, the question I want to ask you in regards to ethics in journalism is, like, how hard do they drive that home when they're, like, teaching you how to be a journalist in college? Because I remember when I was taking classes, we talked about it briefly, but I also wasn't, like, a communications major, so I feel like probably in my other classes it would have been more present. But if that was my major. But, since you graduated with a degree and whatnot, I'm just curious, what was your, like, experience with discussing ethics in journalism and experiencing ethics in journalism now as a journalist?
Great question. It permeates every aspect of a journalist's education and profession, I think. Ethics does. And in college, I mean, I definitely had an ethics and journalism course that I had to take. The funny thing about that course was, even though we learned some kind of like theoretical ethics background, like we actually looked back at ancient philosophy about ethics and things like that, it was for the most part looking at case studies of contemporary journalists facing ethical dilemmas. And in fact, we even had an ethics institute where we had a handful of journalists from around the country come in and present case studies of actual ethical dilemmas that they faced in their careers. And then we kind of discussed how to handle it. And so I would say the training is almost just training you how to process ethical situations that you may find yourself in, because there honestly isn't a hard and fast answer for most ethical situations. That's what kind of makes them ethical dilemmas, is because there are a few different ways you could handle it, and none of them are great. Some are better than others. So that kind of balancing and weighing the pros and cons and thinking about it from all different angles, and that, I would say, is central to every part of a journalist education. Like in every class I took where I was reporting on a story, there would be some kind of an ethical decision that I would have to make. Like one small one that I made in college, I remember I was doing a story, and one of the sources that I had was an ice cream shop owner, and after an interview he gave me a bunch of coupons to his ice cream store, and I was like, I can't accept this. Like, this is it's like a gift, like I can't, that would be a conflict. And he kind of like forced them on me, and I don't know, I guess I was young or something. I didn't know how to respond. And so as soon as I got the coupons and left the interview, I just felt so horrible. I ran straight to my ethics professor office, and I was like, what do? I have all these coupons. And I felt like a really bad journalism student, but I think I ended up giving them away or something like that, or giving them back. I don't remember. But I mean, that's a really small, very college student example. But yeah, I mean, that was in the course of reporting for, I think it was actually my freelancing that I did in college. So it wasn't even for a class or anything. But yeah, I mean, ethical dilemmas kind of rise up every day. And I think the best way to handle them is lots of open communication with the other journalists in the newsroom, so that you can work through with somebody else, like, hey, here's this dilemma that I'm figuring out. What would you do about it? And oftentimes they'll come up with what other people would think, and you'll come away with a more well-rounded decision that you can feel stronger about defending.
Do you have an example of like a juicy story that you had in like an ethical dilemma that you can share? If you don't, that's fine. I just want to know.
So,
spill the tea.
I'm sure I can come up with one. So, okay. Which one do I want to share?
Drop it, girl.
Okay, so a few months ago in April, I was reporting on Laguna Beach, and we sometimes do preview stories where we basically preview what's going to be on the council agenda for the next week, so people can know about it if they want to come and talk in support or against whatever the issues are. So on the agenda for the city council that Tuesday was an item about the police car designs, and it's a seemingly innocuous issue, but essentially the police car designs had already come before the council a few weeks prior, and the council approved this version of a new design that would basically have the words like Laguna Beach Police, and the police would be big letters, and it would have a very faded version of the American flag in the background of the letters. So that's what the council approved unanimously a few weeks prior. So when the police department, however, started rolling out these designs, it ended up being that the design on the police cars turned out way brighter than the version that the council had approved. So it came out this like very bright American flag in police in big letters. And a couple people had spoken at city council meetings in those weeks in between, expressing concern about the police car designs. One person said that they felt it was very aggressive. Another person echoed those thoughts and said that they had been out to eat and they noticed a bunch of kids and families scattering, and when they looked up, they realized it was because there were a couple of police cars with these new designs, and they thought it was just so bold and kind of perhaps intimidating. That's my word, not theirs. So what happened was this issue came back to the city council. And the reason was because the city manager said that what the city council had approved was this faded version of the American flag, and by the time it had actually come out, it was different than what the council had actually approved. So just to be safe, they were going to bring that up to the council again to get the actual design as it came out bold approved by the council. So my boss was like, I think you should do a story about this, because really they're considering it, in part because this wasn't what the council approved, but also because people had complained about the design of the American flag in the lettering. So I did a preview story, and we kind of had a back and forth about it, because we're like, we know this is going to blow up into something because people aren't going to understand all the nuance of this story. And in fact, it did. As soon as the story went out the next day, the local TV station picked it up, the Los Angeles Times picked it up, and from there it just kind of spread like wildfire across the country. Fox News ended up picking it up, and a couple of other national networks, I believe, or other news publications from other parts of the country. And what ensued was a flood of messages from all over the country into the email inboxes of these city council members, as well as the people who were quoted in this story as having spoken at previous council meetings against the designs. And all these people from around the country were like, you're un-American if you don't want the American flag on your police car. What's wrong with the American flag? You hate the country, don't bring that. If you don't like the country, then get out of it. Like, all sorts of vitriolic hate messages came from all over the country, all because of this little city council preview that we wrote for this local paper. And the handling of that story presented several ethical dilemmas. Should we have done a longer piece in the beginning to flesh out all the details? Should we have contacted all the people beforehand? Like, what all went into the story? And I can tell you there were a couple of sleepless nights in doing that story. And what ended up happening was that Tuesday, when the council meeting actually happened, probably a few hundred people packed out the city council chambers, and they burst into the national anthem. People came in wearing the American flag. They were screaming. Some people were yelling. I mean, some people were very polite and had some short speeches to say. There were a couple people who started fights. Like, it was a very dramatic city council meeting, all because of this little story. People coming in from, like, out of town. So, yeah, that was kind of a juicy story that had a wealth of ethical questions in it.
That is freaking crazy.
Yeah, it was wild.
Jeez, Americans. Showing.
A lot of American pride, for sure.
Well, that's interesting. Cool. Thanks for sharing. All right, now my for real last question. What recommendations do you have for people who are looking for the most neutral, unbiased reporting possible? If you have any, if there is such thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say I don't think there is such a thing as objective reporting. I think there's really well-rounded reporting. So my suggestion would be to get news from places that have the most robust reporting possible. So as many viewpoints presented as possible, as much variety of news as possible. And I would encourage people to choose news outlets not only based on a few stories, but like consistently look for certain publications and search them out and try to just intake as much as possible from that news organization before deciding to like put your money behind it or something, because I think a lot of people will make very broad strokes about the news media in general without noticing like, oh, well, the stuff I'm actually reading is really from something that's not even a news outlet, but they just rewrite things that news outlets write, and so it's not going to be as good as the originals. Or they'll be reading like a very biased news outlet and they don't realize that that's not every news publication that sounds like that. So I would encourage people to really seek out some news publications that they think they might like and to just take in as much as possible in order to make their own well-rounded decision if this is something that they want to support. Also, support your local journalism, because there are people out there busting ass to report on what's going on locally, and the stuff that you hear about nationally is important, but a bulk of it anyways comes from local reporters. So support your local news organizations, get subscriptions, donate to the local nonprofit news organizations, and support your local journalists.
Support your local journalists. Amazing. Do you have any last words you would like to part us with, or shall we wrap it up?
Honestly, thank you so much for having me. I am a huge Freitae Effect fan and Freitae fan in general, and I have never noticed the Freitae Effect firsthand in person. So I am just really happy to hear that there's this whole rebranding effort, and obviously people are going to be flocking to this podcast, so it's a joy to be on it. Yeah, for news, I mean, I guess one other thing that I would like to impart is that the news media is comprised of a bunch of really thoughtful, smart, well-intentioned individuals who are journalists like me. And when people make really broad comments against the news media in general, I feel like those comments for the most part are pretty uninformed, and I would just encourage people to remember that there are real people behind the quote-unquote news media who are producing the news for you, so that you stay informed, so that you stay engaged, that you are keeping your government accountable, and that's what we're here for. So love on your local journalists once again.
Amazing. Alrighty, Faith. Well, thank you for blessing our mic.
Thank you for having me.
Alrighty. So now we're going to take a quick break.
Hey.
Howdy.
So we just want to take a second to thank you so much for listening to us and to remind you of a few things.
1, Please follow us on Instagram at The Freitae Effect, on Twitter at TFE Pod, and like us on Facebook.
2. Spread the love and share. Friends can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, follow on SoundCloud and Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio.
3. We want to hear from you. So we accept all forms of feedback and affirmations, or if you have something that you want us to discuss that you find interesting, you can email us at thefreitaseffect@gmail.com.
And last but not least, go to patreon.com/thefreitaseffect and subscribe to become a patron, or make a small donation to help us continue producing this podcast, because you know why?
Because the shit ain't free.
Alrighty, let's get back to the show.
Alrighty, so now we are back from our break, back from Faith's interview. Time to talk between ourselves.
Between the lions. If you're not a 90s baby, you probably don't understand that reference. And we're not going to explain it because Google it, bitch.
Yes.
Heyo.
Read it.
Anyways, so that was like a hella informative interview.
Oh, yeah.
Shout out to Faith Kebab.
Love you.
For, like, first of all, being a journalist. Like, that's a hard-ass job.
Mhm.
And for second of all, like, spreading the wealth and knowledge and greatness that, like, she just brings with her, like, mental capacity and energy and, like, lovely fucking greatness. That's it. Excuse the swear. Sorry. We're just, like, we love her.
Yeah.
Authentically, genuinely, and purely from the heart.
Such much love.
And it's also Scorpio season, so we're not going to stop.
Ain't gonna stop.
Heyo.
Can't stop, won't stop. No
Yes.
apologies.
So now that we had a journalist answer those questions for us, let's answer those questions as regular citizens of the United States of America.
Americans.
So honestly, Simon, like, how do you get your news?
So I'd say Faith really hit the nail on the head with talking about the way millennials get their news, because I fall a lot into that category of just kind of hearsay, like, did you hear that this happened? And then me being like, Google, and then or just seeing something on social media based on what my friends are sharing. But then again, like, that isn't super accurate, or not accurate, but like I don't want to say considerate, but like, you know, it doesn't have as wide a spectrum as like
The rest of the world.
Yeah, because my social biases of like who I have on social media.
Yeah.
So like obviously I have people that think like me.
That's true.
So the news that I'm getting is usually catered towards the way that I think. You know, like,
yeah, just the bias of just how the social media caters to a specific perspective once it understands your algorithm of things that you like. Yeah, and being aware of that shit. That's real.
Yep.
I liked when she talked about how millennials will get our information from social media, and then after we hear that stuff, maybe we will Google it to do further research to understand the topic more, because that's reflective of what I experience. And I feel like if you're a critical thinker, or you're somebody who like went to college, and or like somebody who like had to write papers, or someone who just like genuinely wants to make sure that they have the right perspective, or a full-rounded perspective, like she mentioned also in terms of like getting multiple sources from different outlets that carry different perspectives, right? To challenge the way that you think, but also before making a confirmed opinion, making sure that like you have as much information as possible from a wide range of perspectives. Then I was like, that makes sense. That's what we should be doing. But on like, you know, IQ at large of like people who are on social media, even like especially like Facebook, where people used to share news way more, especially when I was in college. Sorry, my brain's going in like 600 different places, but in the sense of like when I think of people from like our grandparents' generation or our parents' generation, when they're on Facebook and they see news, they're like, that's it, that's the information, because they think that that is the sole like source of things. And it's because they're so used to receiving news from publications that they trust, that isn't fake news, whereas we're on here, we know that fake news exists, and we're more skeptical of it, yet it depends on the person if they're going to question it further and do more research, right? So like it really varies from person to person, and that's what I really appreciated about what she said. In terms of how I get my news, I would say probably mostly through social media. I used to be a heavy advocate for reading tangible news, which is like newspaper, right? especially when I was in high school and I used to take the train all the time to go from Everett to Cambridge for the private school that I went to. I would always grab the Metro and I would read what's going on in the Metro. But this was also before social media was what it is now, when it wasn't necessarily always the news, and I wasn't particularly on Twitter, where Twitter used to be the news source. And now, because Facebook is a conglomerate and has eaten most of social media, that Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat is where you can grab news, right? And they know that that's geared toward a targeted audience, whereas back in the day when I was in high school, right? Like, I would read the Metro, and that's be where I would know what's going on locally. And then if you could afford, again, accessibility to news, if you could afford a subscription to the Boston Globe or the New York Times, that's when you would learn about what's going on, again, locally, nationally, but also it was evolving. It was a huge transition. I also think about, for me, when I went from high school to college, I was more inspired to read the newspaper when I would go home, because when I would go home, that's when I would be like, okay, what's going on in Everett, right? And you could learn what's going on in our hometown by reading the paper. And unless you're an active, informed citizen, I feel like, as Faith mentioned, we're probably rare examples of like people that come from our hometown that actually reads the newspaper at our age, just being so young and actually caring about what's going on, and knowing what outlets to find that information, especially if you're just like an active citizen. That was where we would, because after like high school, Faith went to Washington and Lee, and then she continued to stay out of state, which I don't blame her, because girl, I'm trying to do the same thing. But also just like, that was how we would be like, yo, did you see what happened in the Everett Independent about what's going on in Everett? Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, no matter what hometown you're from, you can always find out what's going on locally by just reading your paper. Even if there are grammatical errors. Yes, I am calling y'all out. Because y'all think we don't read, and we be reading, okay? But still, it's just like, if you actually were an active citizen of your community, or anywhere where you choose to live moving forward, if you really want to know what's going on in your community, read the paper. Because as Faith mentioned in the interview, she said that like, it's still out. It's not that it's outdated, but on a local level, people are still referring to the newspaper for what's going on in their community. Whereas way back in the day, people would read the newspaper to get breaking news. And now we have breaking news at our fingertips. We have breaking news in our phones. We have breaking news at 7 o'clock when we watch the news on TV, or 5 o'clock, whatever you do. But like, the way that news is accessed is so transformative now, and it's still transforming to this day. But it's very interesting to hear that paper news is still being used in a way that just covers different type of information, you know?
Yeah. So, you mind if I go into something about newspapers?
Go ahead, man.
So that was something that Faith, she did mention how, like, the news, there are different groups of people that they have to cater to. So, like, the older generations are more used to the newspaper, whereas the younger generation is more digitally informed. So it's like, I kind of was thinking about, at what point are they going to say, okay, our system of, like, as she's called it, like, the clunky system, like, it has, like, too much going on for them to be able to crack the code and understand how to market it the easiest way. I'm just wondering if it's going to get to a point where they're going to give up on the newspaper. Like,
honestly, it will happen.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's going to happen at some point. Unless there's some crazy, like, like riots.
The revolution.
Yeah, some kind of a revolution where everybody's like, we can't let this go. You know what I mean? Like, but I think that people, even professors that I've had, so way back freshman year or sophomore year, where I was doing, it was freshman year when I was doing the most, and I took like way too many classes or whatever. I low-key was like, let me try communications for 2 minutes. And I took a couple journalism classes, and that should change my life on how I like perceive information gathering. And it was really cool to be taking journalism classes at that time, when it was like maybe like 2009, 2010, where, I know I'm aging myself, where that was the real transition of news information and news sharing and social media really taking over in terms of that. And one of my professors who was really like well established in a journalism career, Dan Cannell, like inspiring as hell. He did like a lot of coverage of the Eritrean refugee situation that was happening during the Derg. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I get this at Simmons. Wow. So he was talking about how to frame press release information on Twitter and how like just how to do all these things. And we like explored the Boston Globe and like how cool it was to like still be able to experience that at our age. Whereas we know that in 10 years, 20 years, whatever, that's all going to be obsolete, right? But to see like newsrooms and like if you're not a journalist, like you're never going to get that exposure and you're never going to see that kind of stuff. And I was also reading this book, Modern Romance by Aziz Ansari. I know that he's like canceled, but like fuck cancel culture. Like, I'm sorry, I just have to talk about like this book because it was actually a good book. He talks about how newspaper news was more than just gathering breaking news or gathering local news. It was also like how people would be like, oh, like jobs, you know what I mean? Or, oh, apartments for rent, or what's going on with sports or dating. Like
the
he
classified, the funnies, like
like there are so many elements to the news that is more than just serious depressing shit or happy things, you know what I mean? Like it was just funny because like especially because the book is called Modern Romance, it was talking about how people used to be like blonde male 5'7", 42 years old looking for somebody who's outgoing. You know what I mean? Like that was what like Match.com was essentially. You know what I mean? Or that's what was Tinder was back in the day, was posting your shit in the newspaper because accessibility to people was totally different. You know?
So then it's like I don't know. It kind of reminds me of more of like a Craigslist kind of situation.
Similar,
than
yeah.
Tinder. Because like, you know, it's more of like you post yourself, but then it almost gets to an escort situation.
Well, no, I mean, but it never really gets that creepy. I mean, I wouldn't know because like I haven't talked to anybody who's ever actually like gone on a newspaper date.
Yeah.
I remember I asked Nani about it when I was reading the book because I was like with her on vacation when I was reading the book, and I was like, Nani, when you were young, like did people actually like? Okay, that sounds fucked up when you were young, but like
Nani's always young.
In your youth, even though she's 18 years old at heart.
Always.
But, like, I was kind of just like, so back in your day, like, did people actually, like, put their information in the newspaper to, like, find a date? And she was like, yeah. But she didn't say that she did it. So I don't think that was the norm, but I think, like, it was, like, acceptable if you did do that. So I thought that was a cool gem of, like, American history, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Of, like, how newspapers were used. Like, I don't know how many people actually know that, but I thought it was cool.
True.
Yeah. But going back to the main question, how I get my news now... I have Spotify. I'm one of those, even though I have an iPhone and I don't use Apple Music.
What? You get news through Spotify?
I do, yeah. So there's this new thing called Your Daily Drive, and I don't drive, but like on my commute to work or in the morning when I'm getting ready for work, there's this playlist called Your Daily Drive, and it incorporates the news and music that I listen to or music that I might like. And so I get like NPR news, and just features of like what's going on around the world. So, I mean, if you have Spotify Premium, you should probably it'll probably make a customized Your Daily Drive list. And it's been keeping me up to date of like what's going on locally, what's going on nationally, what's going on in like certain industries, like in the business world and the sports world, if I actually care, but I don't. You know? Yeah, so that's how I get my news now, especially because I don't watch TV. And I just like stream any TV show that I'm trying to watch. You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason for me to be watching Channel 5. I also like don't trust the TV news stations because I know it's hella biased. Yeah.
Speaking of which, I have a funny story.
Send it.
So when I was a kid, I actually used to watch Fox News basically exclusively because I thought that was like the only news station. And I don't know, I feel like we kind of just grew up using Fox to watch like The Simpsons and like whatever show, you know, that was on like a Sunday night. And then whatever, you know, whenever it ended, Fox News came on. And I'd be like, oh, cool. Like, you know, it's the news.
Yep.
And then I went
because that was all we knew.
And then I got to like high school and started hearing about like what being conservative was and like what being a Republican was and like what that kind of situation is. And then I got to college and I understood it. And then they talked about like different potential places to get the news that have extreme biases. And they were like, yeah, Fox News is extremely Republican. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
So, because, you know, obviously I didn't turn out that way, but like that was just being fed to me on a silver spoon as a kid.
Facts. And it's also like, you know, we live in Massachusetts, right? And people are always like, Massachusetts is a blue state. And I'm sitting here like, Fox 25 is our main news network. Fox 25 is run by Republicans. Is it really a blue state if majority of the state is getting their information from a publication that is mostly conservative?
Yeah. Like,
fucking wake up, people. Be aware of like where you're getting your information from, and like don't just be fucking lambs. But going into the next question of like, how do you think most people get their news?
I feel like nowadays I mean, again, it might just be because of my own personal experience and like my bias, but like I feel like the digital world just has so much information to give all the time, constantly, and like you get notifications even if you don't want them. Like, you know, like you have to like still look at your phone to be like, oh, what? There's something that's shared about a fire. I don't want to see that.
True.
Like, you know, it's just.
That's interesting because now it's kind of about like you're able to shut off what information you want to receive because information is so accessible. So it's like if you don't want to hear about black bodies dying in the street by the hands of police brutality, you can shut that shit off. Yeah. Right? And you can be numb to that shit. Or you can see it so much that you're not inspired to act anymore. You know? Yeah. That is the impact of the news.
The desensitizing.
Yes. Yep. That's real. I was going to talk about how I was going to go back to newspapers for 2 seconds because in my workplace, there's a section when you walk in before you check in with reception that there's still like magazines and newspapers. And I always like walk by and take a peek at what the news titles are and what the headlines are and what the newspapers are actually covering. And it's interesting because, you know, as I've grown, I know that, like, you know, obviously, even as Faith mentioned, there are people who still receive their news through newspapers getting thrown onto their lawns, right? Whereas whenever I see a newspaper, it's when I'm at work or when I'm on the train, because we live in the city and nobody's going to throw a fucking newspaper at your apartment door, right? Unless you're subscribed to something. And again, it goes back to accessibility of news, and that is also correlated to level of education. For example, if you went to college and you want to know what's going on in the world because you're a quote unquote informed citizen, right? Because you paid for college and now that you have this education and this knowledge, then you want to know what's going on in the world. Whereas it's assumed that the rest of the world doesn't care about what's going on in the world, or people who are technically, you know, just not college grads, are like might not be thinking critically about what's going on in the world, and that's kind of fucked up when you think about it.
Well, yeah. If I could actually just jump in on a little idea that you set me off with that, it also makes me think of who has the time to sit down and read a newspaper, and
Facts.
like the, you know, like if you're a single parent raising kids and like you could just put the TV on and have the news like coming out of your screen.
But that's what's like, dangerous about it is because it's like y'all are assuming that people who are technically not in that like elite class of like educational access that brings you to that point, right? You're assuming that we don't care what kind of news we're receiving, and you're assuming that we're all on the same page and the same opinion, hence why popular opinion is always leaning towards right, you know, or leaning towards like a more conservative side because the news they're receiving is from a super fucking biased network on the local large level across the nation. And I mean, we are not even going to be able to get into the topic of global news because I just feel like anytime I hear global news, it's more unbiased and more neutral than American news. When I listen to the BBC, when I listen to like, you know what I mean? It's just like when I hear about news that's going on in other countries, it doesn't always seem like it's super piloted to persuade my view to be a certain way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm sure that in like other countries, they also have these kinds of news outlets that are very driven by a specific kind of perspective. Because like that's why we have the First Amendment in the United States of America, which we will get into later. But yeah.
Yeah. No, that's 100% accurate. Because even like these news stations that when I took my policy class for my social work degree, then we talked about different news stations that lean to the left, lean more to the right, and then we're more in the middle. Yeah. And I remember hearing like NPR was being more towards the middle, and I was, you know, like kind of, but like
right. I always kind of low key thought NPR was just super liberal.
Yeah,
but now as an adult, when I listen to it, I'm like, no, this is honestly the most like generic baseline, as neutral as possible news.
Yeah, because it's still, I feel like, a little bit liberal, because
it is for sure, because like they're covering topics that most conservative news outlets wouldn't cover.
Yeah, and I also just kind of feel like the vernacular that they use a little bit does, you know, like I don't think it incentivizes any kind of ideas against the Republican Party or like any members of it, but I do think that it does favor more to the Democratic side.
I agree. And also, like, Faith mentions that too. When I asked her, like, where can we receive unbiased reporting? And she said there is no such thing as unbiased reporting, because everyone's opinion is an opinion. And that's true. And that's why she encourages all of us to look for multiple sources of outlets and to challenge our perspective by listening to the other side, to be able to understand if you can defend your own argument. And that's like the basics of debating. Yeah. You know?
I don't think I've mentioned before how I really liked that Faith said she, as a journalist, has to go to every single place possible for the news.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it's so great to hear that, because it's just, you know, it reminds me of like Nightcrawler with the guy that just like breaks into the house and like, you know, is just doing that thing for his own personal gain, and it's just like one perspective that he's gonna put out there, where that is just, you know, I don't know exactly what the term is. I know there definitely is one, but it's just causing panic or fear, like
absolutely
just reactionary news, whereas like like Faith, you know, is more driven for informative, like recent, like current events that's actually relevant to the people.
But also, like, that's what makes a good journalist. Someone who's passionate, someone who actually cares about the integrity and the ethics of the information that they are providing for the people. You know what I mean? And it's just like, we're not saying this because she's our homegirl. We're saying this because she's actually good at her fucking job. And also just like talking about like what it means to be someone who is sharing information. Like, knowledge sharing is probably one of the most valuable things you can hold as a human being. Human capital, the information you have on an organization and a person and an event or a source, that's basic. It's the hot goss. You know? It's the hot goss that keeps shit rolling.
It's the 411.
It's high key educational value. You know? Information sharing. Because what would we do without it? Imagine, and it's like, I don't know if you ever had to do this, but when I was in my business classes, we talked about the importance of diversity. Ooh, trigger word. For me, at least. I don't know about y'all. And we did this activity where everybody took this test. I think it was like one of the Myers-Briggs tests or whatever, just like organizational styles, right? And so all the people who were planners, all the people who were future drivers, all the people who were like collaborators or people who like to empathize over like agreement went into their groups. So you were in a group with people who thought the same way as you, right? And so you had to make a list of things that was creative. And when you're with a bunch of people who know how to think the same way that you do, it's harder to make that list. So then we went into groups where it was like a diversity of people with different organizational styles. So it would be like one person who's a planner, one person who's like a driver, one person who's an empath essentially. And you came up with more ideas with people who had different perspectives than you than being in the groups with people who had the same perspective of you, because you guys wouldn't challenge each other to think of creative solutions. So I know that drives home the point of like diversity and perspective is important and diversity, but like it's true. Like you need to have multiple sources of information to really understand like what might be the best solution or what might be the information that is actually pertinent to the situation, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. Beautiful. Yeah, diversity, a little bit of a trigger word.
It is hardcore. I hate even saying it.
It's just because we are people of color, so like when we hear diversity,
it means something
then it
totally
usually
different.
just means us.
Facts.
But when it actually does, you know, when it happens in a group setting, then like you said, like even I've noticed when I work with people that are like me, it's harder for things to get done since like I'm an extroverted person. I'm a very loud thinker. Like when everyone is thinking loudly at once, no one's listening.
Mm-hmm.
And then like when you have people that are more of like they can take as much possible in, like, you know, they're just, I don't really have an idea to give, but like I can, you know, understand and like really get a concise like minutes of version of what you're saying.
Right, like usually introverts are people who are very observant and attention to detail oriented. Yeah,
so like there's just skills that you build on because of your personality and who you are that like really feed into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Group settings.
But speaking of hot goss, I wanted to bring up the concept of magazines as news. Because magazines carried a different kind of news. Like magazines like Reader's Digest, or magazines like The Cosmopolitan, or like, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Just like, I remember being like a little girl walking around Stop and Shop when Dad was grocery shopping and like going to grab magazines and reading them and being like, oh my God, that's what's going on. Because like I never really grabbed tabloids because I knew that tabloids were rumors and it was bullshit. But like magazines I felt like had information that was important. Like for example, like 17 magazine, you know what I mean? Had like tips on how to do your hair. And just stuff like that counts as news. And I just wanted to make sure that like that was brought up as well.
I feel like the Cosmo is more of like you're getting your hair done, or at least portrayed in movies and television. Like you're like at a salon and like you're filling out like this questionnaire or something while your hair's in like the thingy.
But the thing is like, tell me that BuzzFeed didn't basically take over that.
Oh,
you know what I mean? BuzzFeed is the new online magazine, essentially. I mean, because obviously once the internet became a thing, magazines did go online, but like then people decided, oh, well, I mean, if a magazine can do this, I can do this. And that's when blogs got hot, right? And so blogs got hot. And then after blogs got hot, men's not hot. Then people decided, I'm educated, I have a college degree or whatever. Like I have a brain that works and I can think critically. You don't have to have a degree to be smart. And I'm on social media, let me type this amazing ass article or my perspective on something in a really well worded, thought out thing on my status, or let me like make this on my Instagram, or let me like do this on my Twitter. And that's how people become influencers or personalities or like just information sharers, you know? Because it doesn't always have to be about like what's going on in your personal life or like life events. I mean, that can be like what you want to share, but like just being intentional about what information you're sharing and what shit you're throwing out there. It's funny because like one of my really good friends, Jeff, I don't know if he's gonna be okay with me saying his name, but I said it. Hello. He literally just texted me and was like, I've been trying to have more of a like online presence and it's really hard. And then I said word for word, it's really not that hard. Honestly, I applaud you because that just means that like your life is mostly in reality and you're not out here with phone addiction. And he was like, LOL. But like, that's the reality of it too, is like we're on these outlets or these apps because we want to know what's going on, because like, you know, fear of missing out, but also like there's the opposite of that called JOMO, which is joy of missing out, which is what we all need to embrace a little bit more. So sorry if that went on a huge tangent. But that was derived from magazines.
Yeah. No, I always remember walking through Stop and Shop and seeing the magazines of like, Brangelina getting a divorce. Oh no, for the 7th time or something. But like, I don't know. I never really fed into that kind of magazine. I remember buying the magazines for like Shonen Jump, like the anime stuff, because it was talking about the like the different episodes that would be coming out on like Toonami. Like, it was when,
Yeah.
like, Cartoon Network wasn't Adult Swim, and it was, like, really cool in Japanese for a little while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, there was still news that would come out in magazines that would be, like, more television related.
True.
Yeah.
No, there was. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In episode 14, I brought up this class that I took that was a communications class. Just about, like, that was when I was going through my journalist phase.
Mm-hmm.
And in that class, essentially the main point that was driven home was that every show or any kind of media you are consuming has an agenda. And we talked a lot about ethics in that class, but I just wanted to bring up that, like, just be aware that whenever you're reading a book, whenever you're watching a TV show, whenever you're listening to music, there is an agenda behind that, even if the person is saying that there is no agenda. Because every person has an opinion, and that opinion is being drawn into your brain subconsciously. Wow. Just making sure y'all are aware of that shit.
Pew pew.
So, I brought up the First Amendment earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to bring it back.
Good.
Simon, what are your thoughts on the First Amendment? Do you even know what the First Amendment is?
Yes.
Okay.
Freedom of speech.
Hello.
Yes. So, what are my thoughts on the First Amendment?
Yes, sir.
It's a very fine line
Okay.
of like Faith even brings it up, of like the First Amendment and then hate speech. Like, because freedom of speech, you know, like in Britain, you weren't allowed to say fuck the Queen, probably. That's what
Right.
I'm assuming is like a big driver of it. Like, you couldn't say, I'm going to believe in my own shit. I'm not going to follow your jurisdiction. I'm not going to follow your whatever. And then, like, you know, you'd probably fucking get killed if you said that shit under like a totalitarianism situation. Whereas here in the United States of America, then we can say fuck Trump and we can make stickers of it, and like, you know, technically that might be hate speech,
Right.
you know, like Trump says a lot of hate speech to begin with, so like, again, like I said in the other episode, we regurgitate the shit out of what we hear. So yeah, I'm not gonna get too political. But, speaking of hate speech, I just want to define it from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary.
Our favorite dictionary.
Of course. Hate speech is, as it might be stated in the name, speech expressing hatred of a particular group of people. So, it's a fine line of like, what is just your opinion and what you can say.
Right.
And then like, what you're saying and how it's affecting people, and like, maybe when the fuck you shouldn't be talking crap about people like being quote unquote illegal or
Right.
like something like that. But again, we all have the First Amendment protecting ourselves, but only to a certain point.
Yep. And I feel you, and because like that's why I asked that question, because I was just like, what do we do about situations where people are saying words that, because words mean things, as the Read said. The Read podcast, take a listen if you don't know, or the Read on Fuse, because they're on TV now. Shout out to Crystal and Kid Fury.
We are not getting sponsored.
I know we're not sponsored, but I just want to say, because like they're one of my favorite podcasts. But also like just the power of words and word choice, and like the things that you say and how they mean things, right? And so just the idea of how provocative language can invoke harm on others, and can form an opinion or a thought on a certain community. And that is the literal direct relation to harm or like just danger. And so it's like, that's why I was bringing up the First Amendment, because it's like, shouldn't the First Amendment protect you against those things? But then that's where PC culture comes in. And I'm like, where's the balance, you know?
Could you describe PC culture?
Political correctness.
So,
I mean, it's obviously observed from people who are trying to be sensitive towards, and I think sensitive is the wrong word, but for people who are usually biased towards being against PC culture, they like to say that folks are sensitive about the way that you address them, but it's really like we just want to respect people from different identities and like address them how they should be addressed rather than address them how you would want them to be addressed, right? It's the golden rule. So I guess PC culture is kind of like, it's dangerous because sometimes it can be that like everybody, let's all think the same way in some big brother shit, but let's also like just be respectful of each other. And I think at the end of the day, it just all has to go back down to respect and acknowledging where people are at and meeting people where they're at. But also like, it's, again, it goes back to that level of tolerance that we brought up in our America episode. You know, back to episode 3. Yeah, but I just wanted to define what the First Amendment was according to the Merriam Dictionary. I can't speak English.
Dictionary.
Anyways, it is a noun. And it is an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that prohibits any law limiting freedom with respect to religion, expression, peaceful assembly, important, or the right of citizens to petition the government. And Faith mentioned this, like, the news and information is a way of how we as the people hold the government accountable. So when you say that your existence is not political, every single person's existence on this planet is political. So when you choose not to talk about politics or religion or sex or these taboo things that we're not supposed to talk about, that is you muting your own self, muting your own experiences, muting your ability to advocate for your literal own life. And if you don't have to advocate for your life, that's because you are at a certain level of privilege that is unaffected by all of the means of the fucking world. Just saying. Anyways, that's my take on the First Amendment.
So, finishing up with Faith's interview, I just had a couple last points. So I really just wanted to say that frickin' story with the American flag and the police cars, like how that all blew up. That was frickin' wild. It's so much, because it also makes me think of, you know, how the police made themselves accidentally very prominently visible in the community.
Right.
And that is something that, like, I feel like police cars nowadays are straying away from. Like, they're trying to make themselves more hidden.
Because they know that they are in the news all the time, especially with, like, the discussions of police brutality. But in communities like the ones that Faith is covering, like Laguna Beach, right? I don't know if you know this, Simon, but that's a very, like, rich elitist community, right? And so of course they're super nationalistic and all about their patriotism and super America, right? But America without the like Erica, it's more like America, the United States, because they like have money, right? So like when they say, how dare you strip the American flag from this, it's because they are unaffected by the police brutality that is happening across the nation, because they don't have to see that shit every single fucking day. And like, so the reason for the uproar, and I know Faith can't say this because, like, you know, it's like kind of against her whole ass job. The reality of it is that when people do anything that's unpatriotic or against the quote-unquote Constitution or like nationalistic ways of the United States of America, anything that's fuck the fourth or anything that's anti-capitalism, for example, which people don't even realize that they're feeding into that shit, is that like it sounds un-American. So when you're against America, you're against all the traditions, and that falls under the traditions of America. Slavery falls under the traditions of America.
True.
There are so many oppressive factors of our culture that fall under the traditions of being American. So when you say, I'm going to kneel because Colin Kaepernick is fighting for Black lives in the fucking football league and across the world, and because police brutality, that is un-American. Because to be American is to be white. To be American, as we mentioned, just listen to episode 3.
My last point with Faith's interview was just how Azeb kept saying this is my last question. Like,
sorry.
the last, like, 3 or 4.
I know, I'm sorry.
And it reminded me of, like, a teacher that would be like, so this is the last section of class, and, like, everyone's, like, super paying attention, but then you realize that there's still, like, 20 to 30 minutes, and, like, there's a bunch of subsections.
I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't do it on purpose, I swear. Sorry. But, okay, so I guess the last question I wanted to address was, like, what was your exposure to the news growing up?
Like I said, Fox 25 was my main source. CNN, you know, like every now and then. I guess when I would go places and there would just be like a TV in the waiting room, that would also be like a big way for me to get news.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up was like how if you're at like a restaurant getting takeout, or if you're at like, I don't know, the hair salon getting your hair done, like there would always be a TV playing the news. And like always the news was gonna be the local news, and the local news was super conservative. So it's like, no matter what, the news you're getting is hella fucking biased. And it's like boring ass shit or super depressing ass shit.
Yep.
Or the weather. But in Boston, it's important to see the weather because you never fucking know with this tropical ass shit.
Yeah, unless one of our sports teams wins, because that's been happening a lot recently.
Yeah, we've been part of this golden age of just constant winning. But I mean, it's Boston, so we always winning. Hello, Hayden's. Yeah. I kind of just wanted to bring up how, like, for me, when I think about the news and politics and information sharing, I think a lot about just how, like, Ethiopians love to talk about politics. And how, like, anytime we would go over any of our cousins' houses, the news would always be on in the background. Like, it would either be the news or, like, music videos. You know what I mean? And so, like, they would always be drunk as hell talking about the news or drinking coffee after church or something. But the news was always something that was a part of, like, our culture. And even just, like, Ethiopian culture in general, like, we love to talk about politics.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why, like, this culture clash of, like, Americans being like, don't talk about politics. It's like, yeah, the only reason Americans don't want to talk about politics is because if you're white, then that shit, like, doesn't affect you the same way that it does with other races. So it makes your life easier to not have to talk about it because you're uncomfortable talking about issues that are, like, not directly affecting you because all you have to worry about is puppies and cars. Yeah. You know what I mean? NASCAR. Woo. Whereas, like, whenever we were around, like, our Ethiopian family, the news is always a topic because it's like, there's always shit going on in the government. There's always, like, things that are going on that affect us directly, and, like, we as a community always talk about that. Which brings me back to another point of how before social media, people used to actually, like, interact in person. Whoa. Right? Whoa.
Crazy.
Family dinners. Whoa. Doing activities like hiking and shit. But apparently in American culture, bowling used to be a sense of community where people would bond and would be an activity in which people would be interacting with each other and from different walks of life and sharing different perspectives. So now that is less of an activity that is, like, mostly recognized for information sharing, right? It's just interesting to know that as social media continues to become the main source of information sharing, how less people decide to actually have real life conversations, and why things like when you see your family at Thanksgiving and it's very political and very awkward and uncomfortable for a lot of people, especially when they're going through different times of their lives. Like, for example, this whole cultural tradition of, you know, you come back from your first year of college and you're a vegetarian all of a sudden, you know what I mean, is because you're meeting and interacting with other people who come from totally different walks of life. And then you have to interact with your family when you've made this whole new identity for yourself that's not reflective of where you come from, and having to advocate for yourself, right? And it's just funny how, like, Thanksgiving or any kind of major holiday where you're reunited with your family from people that you don't get to see often makes you challenge your perspective and makes you think about where you get your information from, and why you stand for those things. Yeah. So that was my point. You want to get into these key takeaways?
Let's take these flipping keys.
Take the keys.
Take the keys. Well, I guess my first key takeaway, which would be what Faith had repeated a lot, make sure that y'all keep in mind journalists are people.
Journalists are humans.
They're human beings that some of us love them. And,
Yes.
you know, like, so, yeah. Always give your appreciation to your journalists. They're trying their hardest
They
to
really
make sure
are.
that you know what's going on, to keep you safe, to keep you informed, to keep you happy, or just to keep you going.
Amen.
Yeah. That's a big key takeaway I took from Faith's interview. Otherwise, I would say, as a human being, just, you know, be aware of where your news is coming from. Just, even if you want to take a step out of your own shoes and just kind of walk around barefoot for a day and see what's going on with, like, how you actually receive new information and, you know, what your decision making goes into with that. I feel like that'd be a fun exercise for you to do.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not literally take your goddamn shoes off, but, like, you know, metaphorically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Facts. I would say my main takeaway from this is just be a critical thinker. Really evaluate where you get your information and really make sure that you are getting as many sides of the story as possible before forming an opinion and before sharing your opinion. And just really, really, really think about that shit. Because you don't know what kind of effect or impact that's going to have on people around you. You don't know how that's going to draw people towards you or away from you. You don't know how that's going to affect you getting a job. There are so many layers to this shit, quoting Drake. But I'm just saying, like, it's always good to be able to just sit there and challenge yourself, right? And if you choose not to, that's on you.
How you gonna grow if you do not take challenge?
Yeah. Nah. So, Simon, you got any announcements, my friend?
Can I do it? Can I thank them?
You do what you need to do.
It's your thing, isn't it?
I'm gonna do whatever. It's our thing.
Our thing.
Our thing.
Well, I would like to just thank everybody who came out for Azeb's birthday, which is mainly, you know, because it was our fundraiser. But
yeah, for real, yo, like, seriously, it's really beautiful whenever I get to just, like, take a moment to, like, acknowledge the ecosystem of people that we are surrounded by, and, like, we are so grateful for every human being that shows love to the show, everybody who supports the show, and everybody who just supports us as human beings. And, like, really just, like, thank you for popping out and showing love, and, like, every text message that we get, every comment that we get on the show, every share that you share, like, it really makes a huge difference for us. And, like, as we mentioned, this shit ain't free. Thank you for celebrating me and my quarter life crisis. Thank you for dressing up. Thank you for just sharing this whole experience with us, and we hope that you continue to ride along with us and see where this goes. So, like, yeah, we literally cannot thank you enough, but the love is real, and we just want y'all to know it is highly reciprocated.
Oh, yeah. You guys don't know. Azeb and I, every time we receive any kind of affirmation that our show is popping, we send it to each other and we just cry.
Yeah, we're literally like, oh my God, affirmations! And that's what drives us to keep doing this. So, like, thank you. For real. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. We appreciate everyone showing your support. And, you know, you see it in our, like, social media. We'll share you sharing us, giving us love. We'll give you love, boo-boos.
Amen.
Also, maybe we'll have merch soon, but we'll see.
No broken promises.
We got stickers.
Oh.
Oh.
All right, you ready to do this sign off?
Am I doing it?
Yeah, I mean, we can do it.
Okay. We're going to do it together?
We're doing it.
Okay, this is a challenge. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Be sure to like the episode.
Share with friends.
And follow us on social media.
Subscribe and comment on SoundCloud.
Follow on Spotify.
Apple Podcasts.
Or wherever you stream us.
Oh my God, email us.
Or comment on social media.
Or leave a quick review with any feedback.
Affirmations.
Or topics.
That you want to hear on the show.
At thefreighteffect@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening.
Have the greatest rest of your week. Bye.
Bye-bye.